and welcome to another episode of The People's Law. My name is Sarah Mupeseni and I am your host. Today we have a very interesting topic, and today we'll be discussing gender-based violence and the legal protections that are there for the people that have suffered at the hands of abusers in this regard. Again, today we're very privileged to have lawyers from the Law Association of Zambia. So please join me as we welcome Counsel Yande Kalenga. Welcome, Counsel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Really nice to have you here. And Counsel Bentry Banda. Welcome, Counsel.
Thank you.
It's very nice to have you. So maybe I'll start with you, Counsel Yande. What exactly is gender-based violence?
Thank you, Sarah. That's a great question. So gender-based violence is defined in our Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act, number 1 of 2011. And in Section 3, it actually highlights what we define as gender-based violence, which is any physical, mental, emotional, or social abuse targeted towards a person by virtue of their gender. So the definition is very clear in the law and very succinct.
Okay. So this is a by definition of the agenda. It's different from just any other assault from any other person that you meet in the street.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are the different forms of GBV? Maybe Counsel Bentry, you can come in on that one.
Okay. So there are different kinds of gender violence, namely physical, sexual, emotional, and economic. So these are the forms of gender that our Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act, which my learned colleague cited, tend to define.
So maybe before we move from you, Counsel Bentry, does gender-based violence only affect women and children, or can men be victims of GBV as well?
So that's a very good question. The notion out there is that it's the women that face a gender-based violence. That is not the correct position. The men, like the female folks, they equally face gender-based violence. So it's an all-inclusive gender-based violence act that affects society across the board.
Okay. Counsel Yande, what are some of the root causes of gender-based violence in our society?
So in our society, some of the root causes are very complex. And for me, in my view, it stems from some of our cultural norms that sometimes may be harmful. So for instance, the way in which society may view women in a marriage or in a society and their place sometimes results in gender-based violence. Also, some of our religious beliefs and teachings, owing to positions in the home based on gender, do result in gender-based violence. But also, I think some of the systemic issues that we're facing in Zambia, for instance, socioeconomic distress, there are not enough outlets for people to express their emotions or their mental distress, and sometimes this may lead to gender-based violence in our communities, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and some complex factors that we're facing based to the socioeconomic context in Zambia.
Okay, so maybe before I go back to Counsel Bentry, Counsel Yande, are there any circumstances where gender-based violence can be justified under the law?
Absolutely not. Our act completely outlaws any form of violence that is gender-based, be it emotional violence, be it financial. It is actually outlawed in our act and is against the law.
Counsel Bentry, what are the legal provisions in our law that protect against gender-based violence?
Okay, so our laws are very adequate in dealing with gender-based violence. The first point of call is the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act itself. She spells out the acts by one upon another which amount to gender-based violence. But specifically, we have the offenses such as defilement, offenses such as assault, common assault, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and several others that they constitute gender-based violence, so long as they stem from a family setting. Yes.
Okay, so now one of the issues that keeps coming up, Kanso Yande, I think we had addressed this in our earlier episodes, but then it has come up again, is the issue of marital rape and whether that constitutes a crime or whether that can be considered as a gender-based violence. There are a lot of women that have experienced this or are experiencing this in silence and are not, they can't come out in public for fear of being, shunned in society because this is considered a marital right, and therefore a man is within his rights to forcefully take it as and whenever he desires. So maybe you could just comment on that and just clarify what if marital rape is considered a crime in this country.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think it's a very important question, especially given our cultural context and some of the beliefs that we have. So marital rape is a crime under the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act, specifically Section 14, subsection D and E, which states clearly that forced sexual acts that are not consensual, even within a marriage, do amount to rape and gender-based violence. So it doesn't matter if you paid lobola, if you see your spouse as your property, forceful sex within a marriage or sex that is not consensual is marital rape under the Act.
Council Bentry, is defilement and economic abuse considered as gender-based violence?
Yes, it is.
So what are the penalties and sentences for such crimes?
Okay. I'll start with defilement itself, which is having carnal knowledge of a child that is below 16 years, as defined in our Penal Code Section 138 of our Penal Code, Chapter 87 of the Laws of Zambia, criminalizes that conduct. So the penalty to it, if one is found guilty and convicted, the sentence is not less than 15 years. So we have cases, depending on the gravity of the offense, where maybe the child involved, the victim, or survivor involved is of tender age, for instance, 2 years, 3 years or below. The courts, our system is such that that is compounding, rather. It is compounding in terms of the sentence that will be meted out when someone is involved in sexual contact with a child below a certain age, below of tender age, So you find they go even 45 years, 60 years, even life in certain cases, especially where there's also an infection. With this advent of these diseases now, sexually transmitted diseases, the courts will tend to give a stiffer punishment to someone who was infected, that victim or survivor. Yes. Well, so yes, on the whether we have laws also that tend to punish for economic crime. Yes, the gender-based violence also does speak to that aspect, in that when there's this violence, there's a tendency to deprive the other party, the spouse especially, of certain income in the course of time. So the court can order that the person be compensated financially. So yes, I would say there's provision for economic benefit, economic sanction that will be imposed on the victim, on the perpetrator, so that the victim is compensated.
Well, you are watching The People's Law, and on our episode today, we are talking about gender-based violence. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back. Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law. And on this show, we delve into the laws of Zambia as they relate to you and your daily life and help you understand how these laws affect you and how they help you. So on today's episode, we're still discussing gender-based violence. Now, Council, just before we went on our break, I think you had alluded to economic abuse also being part of gender-based violence. I think every time that we hear GBV, we all think physical violence, someone actually hitting you. We do not consider that there's such a thing as economic abuse and all these other forms of abuse that fall under gender-based violence. So maybe you could just help us understand, because with me here, I have the Act, and there's one particular section that I'd like to read out the definitions, and maybe you can just explain a bit more on economic abuse. And here it says, denying a person the right to seek employment or engage in an income-generating activity. Your comment on that, Council?
Thank you. Indeed, the Constitution of Zambia, which is the highest law of this land, gives each citizen or resident in this country the right to the economic freedom, the right to seek employment, the right to earn an income, etc. So if a spouse or if someone who interfaces with a particular individual is preventing that other from accessing the resources which are or she or he direly needs, that in itself constitutes a crime, which the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act envisages, the provision that you've just read.
So I think Councillor Yande had made a comment on this earlier, how most of the time gender-based violence stems from cultural influences. And one of those influences are actually that if your husband, for example, as a married woman, instructs you not to work, you should not work. If you decide to insist on working, you're disrespecting your husband. But according to what we're reading in this act, it is actually, that's also considered abuse. It's actually also considered gender-based violence for a spouse to stop another spouse from working. Okay, what about in instances where, for example, it's the other way around? It's the woman stopping the man from working. Is that also considered to be gender-based violence?
Indeed, it is, because this gender-based, Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act is couched in a manner that the gender means male or female, male and female, excuse me. So it is not there to protect women alone, but it is there also to protect the men folk. So equally, if it's the other way around, that the man is the one who is being stopped by the wife from earning an income, that amounts to abuse, gender-based violence.
Maybe just one last question before we move from economic abuse. I am emphasizing on this one because I'm sure for a lot of viewers out there, it's the first time that they're actually hearing that, economic abuse also constitutes gender-based violence. So in instances where a spouse is working and they're not declaring their income, or they hide their salary from their spouse, whether it's the husband or wife, would that also be considered gender-based violence under economic abuse?
It is, in my view, my considered view, it would be gender-based violence in the sense that when two persons come into holy matrimony, respectively male and female, it is hoped that they become one and that they go into this social contract to be transparent to one another as to showing what resources are available and so on and so forth for the good of the family. So if a spouse is not in a position to tell the other that this is how much they are earning, it will be a source of conflict, because you can imagine in a situation where husband and wife, you don't get to know how much your husband gets. Your expenditure levels will be maybe higher than what, because expenditure levels may be higher than what the other spouse is earning, and that can be a source of conflict, because then we'll hear cases like what we are hearing already, when they will come and say, no, my wife is extravagant and so on and so forth. Because of this, I want to divorce and so on and so forth. So say no to that person and say, but do you disclose to your wife that this is your earning capacity? And then you find the answer is that, no, I don't disclose. So I said, how are you going to justify? Because your wife, when you give the money, she will think that it's still more because you haven't disclosed. So I would advise that disclosure is very important, and non-disclosure will amount to conflicts of that nature, which can border on gender-based violence.
The very last one, Castle. I know I'm staying on this one a bit longer, but I feel like both myself and the viewers need to understand this particular law. What about properties that are acquired in secret by spouses? For example, a husband or a wife has bought a house or a farm, and then they have not declared this to their spouse.
Equally, that will be a source of conflict. The moment that the other party discovers that, will be uncomfortable and say there will be mistrust now. So this is what my spouse is doing. And depending on the way the arguments flow, you could use that as a basis of violence against you, which is also defined under the Gender-Based Violence Act.
Okay, now coming back to you, Councillor Yande, what protections are available for gender-based violence victims, and how can these be acquired?
Thank you. So a key component of the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act is what we call protection orders that are covered in Section 10. And what these protection orders are, essentially, is a victim or a survivor will apply for a temporary restraining order to keep the perpetrator away from them. So anyone can apply, even on behalf of the survivor. So maybe someone acting on their behalf, a police officer, a social worker, a teacher, whoever is trusted in that community. And you can apply at any subordinate court in your area. And there are two types of orders. There's what we call an interim protection order, which is temporary, maybe about 3 months. And a more final one that we just call a protection order, which lasts up to 1 year. Mm-hmm. But essentially what these orders do is they can extend from creating a distance between the perpetrator and the victim, speaking to custody with the safer parent, also talking about maintenance orders in terms of the family home, just to kind of create a buffer while the case is being investigated by police or is within the court system.
Okay, so since the GBV is being categorized as a crime, mm-hmm. does this then mean people cannot just go directly to buy someone, to sue someone for GBV? Does it always have to go through the police as the first stage of reporting?
Yes, so this is actually a criminal offense, and the first point of instance is a police station. Our police stations have a victim support unit that are well equipped to receive survivors and victims and advise on the next steps, provide referrals for legal aid, also provide referrals for therapy, or even hospitals in some instances. So immediately you're a survivor of any violences that are especially physical, such as assault, battery, rape, sometimes even murder. The first instance is to report to the nearest police station.
Well, you are still watching The People's Law, and today we're discussing gender-based violence. For now, we'll take a short break and we'll be back. Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law, and on today's episode, we are discussing gender-based violence and what the law says about that. Council Bentry, so maybe you can help us understand, is it wise and advisable to try and settle gender-based violence issues outside court or outside of the authorities?
As my colleague rightly puts it, the first point of call for a gender-based violence is to report the matter to police, Zambia police, So there's victim support units, there's Zambia Police. Basically, victim support unit is it's a wing under Zambia Police that is tasked to handle specifically issues that are bordering on anti-gender-based violence. So this therefore implies that you are not encouraged as the public to settle matters of gender-based violence outside courts. However, the courts have the liberty or the discretion to allow parties settle these matters after they've come to court in a manner such as was highlighted by my colleague, to go for counseling and so on and so forth. Offenses which are subject of referral for counseling and some form of punishment that can be settled, rather that is not so heavy in terms of sentence, is such that because the courts under Section 8 of the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 88 of the Laws of Zambia, they are mandated to allow for reconciliation matters of personal nature, for instance, common assault, battery, but of course not assaults occasioning actual bodily harm, where maybe one's skin is punctured as a result of that physical contacts and lawful physical contact by one upon another. So those offenses that are attracting less stiffer punishment, so to speak, which in law they call misdemeanors, offenses that have sentences below 4 years, 5 years, the courts can divert, can allow the parties to settle. So the point is, people should not take the law in their own hands, that when there's a GBV case, they should handle it. They should go to a pastor and handle it. They should do it in their household and sort it out. No, they should be reported.
Okay. Now, Kansayande, coming back to you, we understand that the victims of gender-based violence are not just adults. It's not just between husband and wife and husband, that children can also be victims of gender-based violence. So what protections exist for children who are in homes where there is violence?
Thanks. Children are a very special protected class in our society, and I think our laws adequately reflect that. Recently, we passed the Children's Code Act, which criminalizes child marriage, but also puts special protections in places where children are present, for instance, in churches, in schools, and in homes. So institutions that are directly working with children have to have safeguarding procedures that protect children, and this is enshrined in our law. Secondly, we've always had provisions, for instance, in our penal code on defilement and exploitation of children that also criminalizes that. But also the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act also has provisions that specifically target children and protect them. So our legal landscape has adequate provisions to protect children. Where I think perhaps there might be a gap is in sensitization and also in children knowing their rights and how to report them, because most often in child abuse cases, the perpetrators are those that are caring for the children. So how does a child survivor or a child victim enforce their rights under these provisions of the law?
Okay. Now, speaking about children, we move on back to the adults. Can sexual harassment at a workplace be considered gender-based violence as well?
Definitely it is. And sexual harassment is very prevalent in our workspaces. And it's something, especially looking at our socioeconomic context, that's shrugged off, that's said, oh, it's normal, that's how you get a promotion. But it's not. Our employment code has specific provisions that ensure and prohibit sexual harassment in the workplace. Not to mention, our constitution also has an enshrined right that people that are working and in workplaces have the right to work in a place that's safe and that's free from harassment. So our employment code adequately covers that. If anyone is experiencing any sexual harassment in the workplace, any unwanted advances, they should report that and they should take their employers to task.
Okay, now in the same vein, how do you think economic dependence contributes to gender-based violence?
It does quite significantly. I can give you several examples. For instance, a woman whose sole breadwinner is her husband and her husband is constantly beating her. How is she expected to report that to the police and take them? And essentially, some of these offenses carry maximum term imprisonment sentences. So who will provide for the family? Who will provide for their well-being? It's a very big deterrent in reporting some of these cases because the woman is economically dependent on the perpetuator. So instances of gender-based violence are very delicate and very difficult, and in my view, need holistic solutions such as economic empowerment and opportunities for women or for victims and for survivors so that they have the independence to test the law that is adequately there.
Mm-hmm. Now, we keep coming back to women, Sansel Bentry, because women have been, men also suffer, obviously, gender-based violence, but most of the reported cases have been women. So what protections and policies are there to protect women that are in informal jobs, such as domestic workers and maybe some that are working for small shops or small farms, just these informal kind of jobs where women go? What protections are there to protect them, policies to protect them, I guess, gender-based violence?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So, as has been said by my colleague, we have adequate provisions in our laws in this country that protect that group of persons that you have highlighted. The employment codes, the employment, the Labor and Industrial Act, the employment code itself, the Constitution of Zambia, all those pieces of legislation, they have a tendency to outlaw any infringement of rights of persons in that category. So other than that, I think the issue is, rather than us leaving the burden on the duty bearers, or is the state who have the laws in place and so on and so forth, I think it's about time that sensitization must be upped, that people begin to know the existence of these laws, and also beyond that even the employers or whoever those people are answerable to are not found wanting, that they inculcate this culture of adhering to these principles that are set by our lawmakers.
Well, you are still watching The People's Law. Today we're discussing gender-based violence, how it affects you, and how the law protects the victims of gender-based violence. For now, we go to the public and find out what they know about these laws and their experience with the same. We'll be back short. But Abigail, mwizi wa gender-based violence.
Easy.
Ni chani.
Gender-based violence, this is when someone or mamuna amenya mkazi without valid reason.
Vamusonda mwizi wa gender-based violence kuti nchani.
Gender-based violence ni
GBV
ni kusupportana munga gender-based ingara munga mkazi na mamuna sipamene. Neni funika mamuna usupporta mkazi sipamene. Usupporta kwa bana
Nanga mwamuna akamenya mkazi ni mulando ola si mulando?
Mulando.
Nanga mkazi akamenya mwamuna ni mulando ola si mulando?
Even mulando.
Na even mulando.
Kai once ni 50-50 kai.
So mwamuna akamenya wako li mkazi angashite report kuti?
Afunika shita report ku police. Kujenda kai. Ishwambo pele ya mpamvu kuti mkazi manja.
Vamulanga mwene. Mwashirapo nchi pali gender-based violence or GBV.
So GBV need but someone is violating. For instance, okay, let me just give an example. Maybe Ine have a wife. Then from that, maybe I'm abusing her and all that. So I think that's what I know about gender-based violence.
Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law, and today we're discussing gender-based violence and what the law says about it. Now, coming back from our break and hearing the different views of the public, Counsel Bentry, one of the things that make women or victims of gender-based violence afraid to come out is economic dependency, which is, I think, something that Counsel Yande had spoken about earlier. So are there any protections or shelters or financial aid that's given to these victims? Because if they do come out and report their abusers to the police, or as it were, then they might not get the economic benefits that they're currently getting, which is what makes most women afraid to come out. So are there any such provisions so that if there are any victims of GBV that are watching, they may be encouraged to come forward knowing that they will still be taken care of?
All right. Thank you for that question. Indeed, government realizing that these marginalized persons, persons that suffer from the acts of anti-gender-based violence, may be in a position of financial distress. One of the mitigating policies that the government has put in place is to engage various stakeholders, which includes the judiciary, legal aid, the correctional facility, the CSOs, the social work, the Department of Social Work, Community and Department of Community Services, so that now we have, out of that being based, shelters for victims, where victims are taken for the reason that, one, perhaps there could be interference on the evidence. Let's take, for example, a case of defilement. So there's a tendency of persons trying to suppress evidence so that the matter doesn't escalate to police or eventually is prosecuted. So they will take the victim, if it's a child survivor, and the social welfare will find a shelter for them. Okay. So my closing remarks really will be that to the public, we should not leave this task of anti-gender-based violence campaign to the government alone. The government has done its part by criminalizing it, by putting up statutes, policies that will give us an enabling environment within which we can operate. Ours as the public is to ensure that we inculcate the family values that are desirable, that are the kind that will respect the rights of the other. In the words of Thomas Jefferson, a renowned proponent of human rights, he said, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, which are that the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness."
Thank you very much, Counsel Bentry. And Counsel Yande, your closing remarks and advice to the public?
My closing remarks to the public are that we shouldn't leave the movement for anti-gender-based violence to the institutions and to the government alone. I think every single person that is a citizen of Zambia has a responsibility to speak up when these things happen. They happen in our boardrooms, they happen in our family convenings. How can you be a champion to just stand up and say, this behavior is unacceptable, everyone has equal rights and equal access to humanity, as my learned counsel has highlighted. So for me, I would love to urge the public that the law is there, the spaces are there, the campaigns are there. There's a campaign annually called 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence that happens every November to December. But outside of slogans and NGOs and institutions, what are we doing in our homes, in our cultural settings, in our day-to-day life that we're championing a culture that says no to gender-based violence? So I would like everyone to reflect on that and do a small thing, a small part to challenge some of these harmful cultural norms that perpetuate gender-based violence in Zambia.
Well, viewers, you have heard from our lawyers. This is the People's Law. And on this episode, we've been discussing the topic of gender-based violence and the different forms that it takes, including economic violence, including sexual abuse, and all the others. So I hope you have learned a thing or two, and please do interact with us on our social platforms. You can send us your questions if you need more clarity and more information. We are here to make sure that you learn about the law and you get the information that you need. This has been Sarah Mupeseni. See you on the next episode.